Week we asked some questions on the various things that you would want to see more on. We had a lot of recommendation, a lot of suggestions, and a lot of queries from the students, and so I'm very much excited to announce that we're going to be releasing videos in line with the various subjects and various topics that students have requested for us to make content on, or make the content available on our YouTube channel. So in case you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel yet, make sure that you head on to YouTube, Nhyira Premium, and subscribe to the channel, because every single day we are releasing new lecture videos on various... Yeah, hello? Yeah, so our broadcast dropped. Just some network issues here. So the broadcast dropped, but we have to continue from where we started. We were discussing the issue about classification of cost, and we're looking at the differences between the direct cost and then the indirect cost. So we want to continue from there in relation to that. I want to continue from there in relation to that. So, like I was giving you the differences between direct material and indirect material. The first, the direct cost and indirect cost. The first thing we spoke about is about what? Traceability. That the direct cost can be traced or allocated to a particular cost center or cost unit, whilst the indirect cost cannot be cost unit. Give me a moment. Let's see if we can fix this network thing. Okay, so we are good. Let's go. So we mentioned that summation of all direct costs add up to prime cost, and then the summation of all indirect costs add up to overheads. Now, for those of you who are back to the broadcast, we dropped network issues here, so the live broadcast ended, but we still have to continue. So we are back here, hoping that the network will be more stable now. And another difference we can talk about in relation to the direct and indirect is the issue about controllability. Controllability, that is, direct costs are controllable, whilst indirect costs are uncontrollable. Now, what do we mean by that? For instance, back to my furniture illustration, I can decide the wood that I want to use for the furniture. So the type of wood I want to use for the furniture, I can decide that. So I have control over it, and it's a direct cost, and it is what? A controllable cost. I can decide the foam I want to use, the seat cover I want to use. We can decide that, okay, because it's a direct cost. But when it comes to the indirect cost, we cannot have what? Much control over it in relation to that, like electricity, like the overheads, like the indirect materials. We may not have much control over it. So direct costs are controllable, whilst indirect costs are uncontrollable in relation to that. Then another difference about direct cost and indirect cost is that direct costs form a greater proportion of the total cost of a product or a process, whilst indirect cost takes a lesser percentage of the total cost of a product or a service. So if you are looking at the total cost of my furniture, you realize that the direct component of it will be far greater than the indirect component. If you are just joining the broadcast, you can share the broadcast every single day, every weekday, Monday to Friday. I go live here on YouTube to teach. And I'm looking today at the management accounting, and we are looking at cost classification, and we've discussed a couple of issues in relation to classification of cost by nature. And I said classification of cost by nature is where we classify cost according to the what? The elements of cost. And we said there are three elements of cost: material cost, labor cost, and then expenses. And I mentioned that these material costs, labor costs, and expenses can further be divided into direct material, indirect material, direct labor, indirect labor, direct expenses, and indirect expenses, and we've gone through all of that in relation to that. So that is the first thing, classification of cost by nature. Classification of cost by nature. So let's move on to the second thing. And that is going to be classification of cost by behavior or according to behavior. So that's number 2, classification of cost according to behavior. Now, what does this mean? Classification of cost according to behavior simply means classification of cost according to how the cost varies with the output level. Classification of cost according to how the cost varies with the output level. So, for instance, we have what is called fixed cost. So this is where costs are classified into fixed, variable, semi-fixed, semi-variable. So fixed cost, variable cost, semi-fixed or semi-variable, and then step cost. Step cost. So what are fixed costs? Fixed costs are costs incurred irrespective of what the output level. It means when the output is 0, the entity will still be incurring what? The fixed cost. Alright? So that cost simply is like this, because if you start a business, you rent a place, you've not started working yet, but you've rented a place, or you buy equipment, you've not started working yet, but you have paid for the equipment. So those are fixed costs. Okay, so fixed cost remains the same irrespective of the output level. Then we come to variable costs. What are variable costs? Variable costs are costs that vary with what? The output level. In other words, the higher the production capacity of the organization or the higher the service rendered, the higher the what? Variable cost that the entity is going to be incurring. So we have what is called the variable cost. So if we want to manufacture 100 chairs, that means that we are going to need more woods, more how do we call it? Foams, more seat covers, more nails. So all these are variable costs that we're going to be incurring in relation to that. Then we come to semi-fixed costs or semi-variable costs. These are costs that are partly fixed and then also partly variable. Costs that are partly fixed and partly step costs. Now with step costs, the idea about step costs is that it is a cost that is fixed for a given output level but become variable when the output level changes. Okay? So diagrammatically, that looks like this. Okay? So fixed, variable, like that, step cost. So let me explain it and make it a bit meaningful for you. So for instance, if an organization produces any units up to 10,000 units, they incur a cost of say $10 million. Sorry, $10,000. So if you produce from 0 to 10,000 units, or let's say to 1,000 units, you will incur a cost of say $20,000. However, any additional units produced after 1,000 units, you will incur a cost of say $25 per unit. That $25 per unit for the unit after the 1,000 is what is referred to as what? The step cost. So as far as we are producing from 0 to 1,000, we'll be incurring what? The 20,000. But then when the unit goes beyond the 1,000, then the additional units there will be incurring a cost of what? $25 per unit. That is why it is called what? The step cost. I'll be solving a question on this particular discussion about the cost classification later on, probably in the course of this week, maybe tomorrow or Friday. I could solve a question on this. But one important thing is that when it comes to dealing with cost behavior, we are going to be given the total cost sometime. So in the exam hall, instead of the examiner giving you what is fixed cost, what is variable cost, what is the step cost, what the examiner will do is to give you the total cost. So the question we then ask is, if the examiner gives us the total cost, what do we do? What do we do? So let me explain this to you. So you go to the exam hall and this is the question. So we have the year, we have the total cost, we have the outputs. Okay? Year, total cost, and then the outputs. So what do we do? So year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. So let's say the total cost in dollars, let's say 200,000 here, has an output of say 8,000 or 80,000. Then we have 250,000, has an output of say 5,000 or 50,000. Then we have say 420,000, has an output of say 120,000 units. Then the fourth one will be 85 or $82,000, has an output of say let's say 15,000 or 12,000 units. So this is the question that you have before you, and the examiner may ask you, so require, calculate the total cost of producing 15,000 units. Calculate the total cost for producing 15,000 units. So the question you then ask yourself is, all right, how do I get here? How will I be able to get this question? Because as you can see here, there is no fixed cost, there is no variable cost, everything is in totals. So how do we break it down? The way we break this down and solve this question is to use what is called, or do what is called, the high and low method. The high and low method. Now, what is the high and low method about? The high and low method simply states that, step 1, we calculate the variable cost per unit. You calculate the variable cost per unit. So the way we will be able to solve a question like this, where the examiner is asking us, calculate the cost incurred or the total cost of producing 15,000 units, and you have total cost and outputs, the way you answer such a question is to use the high and low method. So step 1 of the high and low method, you calculate the variable cost per unit. But how do you calculate the variable cost per unit? So VC per unit, we will say that maximum total cost minus minimum total cost divided by maximum output minus minimum output. Okay? So the variable cost per unit is, using the high and low method, is the maximum total cost minus minimum total cost divided by maximum output minus minimum output. That is very, very important. So if you look at the question, you need the maximum output and what? The minimum output. So let's go through the question and see. So if you check, what is the maximum total cost here? I can see 420 here, and definitely that is the maximum output. So year 3 is the maximum. Then which one is the minimum here? Let's see. The minimum here is 82,000. So year 2 becomes what? The minimum. So we're going to be using these 2 years as the benchmark to calculate what? The variable cost per unit. So that is step 1 in relation to the computation. So if we calculate the variable cost per unit, step 1. Step 2, we say that at minimum, we will calculate the fixed cost. So at minimum, so after you use the high and low method to get the variable cost per unit, you say at minimum. Now at minimum, you know that total cost equals what? the fixed cost plus variable cost. Remember, you have already calculated the variable cost per unit here from the 2 years. So you say at minimum, in this question, at minimum will be the 12,000 units. So if at minimum is the 12,000 units, then your total variable cost, okay, is going to be the 12,000 units times the variable cost per unit you calculated in step 1. The variable cost per unit you calculated in step 1. Now, unfortunately, I don't have my Casio calculator here with me. I don't have any calculator here. Otherwise, I would have done the computation. But I'm just guiding you so that you can do it at home or at your office. So, at minimum, which is the 12,000 units, total cost is fixed cost plus variable cost. Now, since you have the variable cost per unit, you multiply that by what? The minimum unit of what? 12,000, and that gives you the total variable cost. Now, once you have the total variable cost, remember, you are working at minimum. Since you are working at minimum, the minimum total cost is how much? 82,000. So, your fixed cost will be equal to total cost minus variable cost. Where, at minimum, your total cost is what? The $82,000. So the $82,000 minus the total variable cost. Now, what is the total variable cost here? The total variable cost here is what you calculated here. So once you bring that total variable cost, you'll be able to get what? Your fixed cost. You'll be able to get your fixed cost. Now remember, the assumption here, there are two assumptions that you're going to be using to solve such a question. Number one, fixed cost remains the same irrespective of the output level. And then number two, variable cost per unit remains the same irrespective of the output level. So let me take that again. These are the two assumptions we use. Fixed cost remains the same irrespective of the output level, and variable cost per unit remains the same irrespective of the output level. So after you get your fixed cost here, what do? You can now go to the question and go to the final step and then compute the total cost for the 15,000 units they are asking you to compute. So in this question, it was calculating the total cost of 15,000 units. Now, you already have variable cost per unit, and remember the assumption I told you about. Variable cost per unit remains the same irrespective of the output level. So from here, you can get total variable cost by multiplying the 15,000 by what? The variable cost per unit you calculated above there. And that gives you the total variable cost. Once you have the total variable cost, remember, from step 2, you calculated the fixed cost, and we say fixed cost remains the same irrespective of the output level. So for our 15,000 units, the total cost will be equal to the total variable cost which you calculated here plus the fixed cost which you had in step 2. That is how you use the high and low method to answer questions like this. Remember, this is about classification of costs according to what? Behavior. Now, in the question, we could build into it what? High and low method. And like I mentioned, we'll be solving some full questions later on in relation to how we can use the high and low method. And you can try this. Are you getting it? You can try and solve the full question, and then you know what to do. You can send it to me on WhatsApp. I'm going to be checking it for you so that we see how it goes about that. So that is classification of costs according to behavior. So we've done only two. Classification of costs according to nature and classification of costs according to what? Behavior. So these are what you have to understand. We have classification of costs according to function. This is where you classify the cost based on the departments that incur the cost. So we're going to have production cost, finance cost, selling and distribution cost. All of these are the issue in relation to calculating or computing what? The classifying the cost. To give you the pro forma of the cost sheet or the cost card, okay? The pro forma of the cost sheet or the cost card. We've already done this indirectly, so I'm just going to do it. So we bring direct material cost, direct labor costs, direct expenses. These three add up to give us what? the prime cost. Remember, summation of all direct costs gives prime cost. Then after that, we add factory overheads. Okay, so add factory overheads. Now you're going to be doing workings on factory overheads, and I'm going to take you through that as well later on as we look at accounting for overheads, and most importantly, look at absorption of overheads, because that is where this is going to come in. Once we add a factory overheads, we get a production or factory cost. Production or factory cost. When we get a production or factory cost like that, we then add the non-production overheads. Non-production overheads. Now the non-production overheads include a lot of things. We can talk about selling and distribution, so S&D, okay, admin overheads, finance overheads, all of these. Then when we add this total non-production overheads to the production cost, that gives us what? The total cost. When we then add the factory margin or markup to the total cost, that gives us the selling price or the quoted price. So this is what you have to understand about classification of cost. Now what I try to do is to actually give you an introduction to management accounting, and most importantly, give you some key terminologies that will set the tone, that will set the pace for the entire management accounting syllabus. Thank you very much for joining the broadcast today. Very much excited. I appreciate the support. Remember to continue to comment with your questions. I read all your comments. I reply to all your comments personally. And share this channel with a lot of people. Tell them about it, that every single weekday, Monday to Friday, 4 p.m., Nhyira Premium goes live on YouTube and he teaches. And let's together spread the news and let's help a lot of people as much as possible. Again, thank you very much for joining the show today, the Business Lecturer in Within Show, and I will see you same time tomorrow, 4 p.m. as we continue with our discussion. Most importantly, make sure you comment below with the topics that you want to see more here, you want us to cover more here on the channel, so we can assist you to prepare well for the examination. So you take care of yourself, and I'll see you tomorrow.